In the deep vaults beneath every Space Marine fortress monastery, where the air tastes of sacred oils and 10,000 years of accumulated silence, there stand rows of sarcophagi. Some hum with the quiet power of functioning life support systems. Others have gone cold, their ancient inhabitants finally granted the rest that was so long denied them. But a few, a precious and terrible few, contain warriors who remember a time before the Imperium became what it is today. They remember the Great Crusade. They remember the Emperor himself, not as the God Emperor of the imperial cult, but as a man walking among his sons with purposes he would not fully explain. And they will not tell you what they know. These are the Dreadnoughts of the Great Crusade, the oldest witnesses to humanity's greatest undertaking and its most catastrophic failure. They have lived for 10 millennia, watching empires rise and fall, seeing the Imperium transform into the very thing the Emperor claimed to oppose. They possess knowledge that could shake the foundations of the Imperium itself, truths that would call into question every prayer uttered in the Emperor's name, every sacrifice made in his supposed divinity. Yet when asked about those ancient days, about the Emperor's true intentions, and the real goals of the Great Crusade, these ancient warriors carefully measure their words. They speak of battles and tactics, of brothers long dead and victories hard won. But about the deepest questions, about what the Emperor truly wanted and why so much of it was kept secret even from his own sons, they remain strategically silent. This is not forgetfulness. These warriors remember everything with a clarity that would drive lesser minds to madness. This is not ignorance, for they stood in the Emperor's presence and heard his words when he still walked among mortals. This is choice. This is duty. This is the heaviest burden they carry, heavier even than the ceramite and adamantium shells that encase what remains of their mortal forms. They know what the Emperor really wanted. They understand why it failed, and they have chosen, for 10,000 years, to guard that knowledge like the most dangerous weapon in the Imperium's vast arsenal. Because perhaps the most terrifying truth they possess is this: the Imperium cannot survive knowing what they know. The current mythology, however false, is the only thing holding humanity together in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to devour it whole. Let me tell you why these ancient warriors, the last living links to an age of legends, have decided that some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. The nature of entombment. To understand why these ancient dreadnoughts guard their secrets so carefully, you must first understand what it means to be a dreadnought, what it costs, and why the oldest among them are so rare and so revered. The dreadnought is not simply a weapon system or a suit of powered armor. It is a walking tomb, a life support system wrapped in weapons and armor, a prison that its occupants cannot leave until death finally grants them release. When a space marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even the advanced medical technology of the apothecaries cannot restore them to fighting capacity, but their mind and will remain strong, they may be granted what the chapters call the highest honor. They are interred within a dreadnought chassis, their broken body sealed within an armored sarcophagus, their nervous system hardwired directly into the machine that will become their body for whatever time remains to them. The process is as brutal as it sounds. What remains of the Marine's body, perhaps only a torso and head, vital organs kept functioning by machines, is suspended in amniotic fluid within the sarcophagus. Their brain is connected directly to the dreadnought systems through a mind impulse unit, an archaic technology that translates thought into action, allowing the entombed warrior to control the massive combat walker as naturally as they once moved their own limbs. In theory, this is a kind of immortality. In practice, it is something far more complicated and far darker than the official rhetoric suggests. Extended neural interface with a machine as large and complex as a dreadnought causes immense mental stress. The tech marines speak clinically of lethargy confusion, dyschronometria, and even senility setting in over time. What they don't often mention is the psychological toll of existence in such a state. Imagine, if you can, losing all sensation except what feeds through mechanical senses. No taste, no smell, no true touch. Your voice becomes a crackling mechanical approximation, synthesized by the Dreadnoughts systems. Your vision is filtered through optical sensors that reduce the world to targeting data and threat assessments. You cannot feel the sun on your face, cannot taste food, cannot embrace a brother in arms. You exist in a state of profound sensory isolation. Your only purpose to wake when the chapter needs you, fight until the enemy is destroyed, and then return to the darkness of dreamless sleep. For most Dreadnoughts, this sleep is a mercy. The chapters seal them in stasis vaults when not fighting, allowing them to skip decades or even centuries between awakenings. This preserves both the machine and the pilot, preventing the worst degradation that comes from extended consciousness. But it also means that when they wake, the world has changed. Brothers they knew are dead. Traditions have evolved. The Imperium itself has transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Each awakening is a small death, a reminder that you are a relic from a time increasingly distant from the present reality. You are honored, yes. Revered, certainly. But you are also fundamentally alone, a ghost haunting a present that barely resembles the past you remember. And that is the experience of ordinary Dreadnoughts, those interred in the more recent millennia. Now imagine what it means to be one of the ancient ones, those who remember the Great Crusade itself, the Dreadnoughts who fought beside the Emperor when he still walked openly among his warriors, the ones who remember the Primarchs in their prime before betrayal and tragedy scattered them across the stars or claimed them entirely. These ancient warriors have been waking and sleeping for 10,000 years. They have watched the slow transformation of the Imperium from the Emperor's vision of a rational, atheistic civilization, united by science and reason, into the superstitious theocracy it has become. They have seen the imperial truth, which once held that there were no gods, and that mankind's destiny was to claim the galaxy through enlightenment, replaced by the imperial cult that worships the Emperor as a god and burns those who question this dogma. During the Great Crusade, several patterns of Dreadnought were in common use, each with its own characteristics and capabilities. The Contemptor pattern. Dreadnought was perhaps the most prestigious, larger and more powerful than later models, featuring advanced systems including atomantic field generator technology that would later be refined into the storm shields used by Terminators. These machines incorporated secrets from the dark age of technology, mysteries that even the Mechanicum could barely maintain, let alone replicate. The Contemptors that survive into the current era are revered as holy relics, irreplaceable treasures containing both ancient technology and even more ancient warriors. The Leviathan pattern siege Dreadnought was developed in secret on Terra during the latter days of the Great Crusade, created without the Mechanicum's knowledge or approval. These massive machines bristled with weapons powerful enough to crack open fortifications and shatter enemy armor, but they came with a terrible price. The mechanisms unique to the Leviathan pattern placed extraordinary strain on the pilot's mind, driving them to the edge of madness and beyond. The few that survive into the present are dreaded as much as they are revered, walking embodiments of barely controlled fury, containing minds ravaged by 10,000 years of torment. When a Leviathan wakes, even its own chapter treats it with a mixture of awe and fear, for no one knows if the ancient warrior within still possesses enough sanity to distinguish friend from foe. The Dreadnought pattern served as heavy fire support, a test platform for advanced weapon systems developed during the 2 centuries of the Great Crusade. The Saturnine pattern, developed in the tech enclaves of Saturn, required pilots with specific mental gifts, possibly latent psychic abilities, to fully access its capabilities. Each pattern had its strengths, its weaknesses, its particular demands on the warriors sealed within. But they all shared one fundamental characteristic. They were prisons as much as they were weapons, and the sentence they imposed was eternal service in isolation from everything that made their occupants human. Now consider what this means for the knowledge these ancient warriors possess. They remember conversations held 10,000 years ago with perfect clarity, even as their ability to form emotional connections degrades with each awakening. They retain tactical and strategic information from battles fought when the Imperium was young, but struggle to care about the present conflicts in which they fight. Most importantly, they remember the contradictions. They remember what the Emperor said his goals were, and they remember the actions that suggested his true goals were something else entirely. They remember the imperial truth being proclaimed with absolute certainty, even as they watched it being selectively enforced or quietly ignored when expedient. They remember being told that humanity's future lay in reason and enlightenment, even as they witnessed their father creating weapons of war that would make reason meaningless. And unlike the historians and scholars who pore over fragmentary records trying to understand that distant age, these dreadnoughts don't have to guess or interpret. They were there. They saw it with their own eyes. They heard it with their own ears. The knowledge they possess is first-hand, undeniable, and potentially catastrophic to the Imperium's current ideology, which is precisely why they've spent 10 millennia carefully controlling what they reveal and what they keep locked away in the vaults of their ancient memories. The imperial truth and its promises. To understand what the Great Crusade dreadnoughts know and why it matters, we must first examine what the Emperor publicly claimed he wanted for humanity. The foundation of the Emperor's vision was something he called the imperial truth, an ideology so central to his plans that it was enforced with the same zeal that the Imperium now reserves for hunting heretics. The imperial truth was a complete rejection of everything humanity had believed for tens of thousands of years. No gods, no spirits, no afterlife, no supernatural forces at work in the universe. Everything, the Emperor proclaimed, could be explained through science and reason. Faith was not merely unnecessary, it was actively harmful. A poison that had kept humanity divided and weak throughout the age of strife. The Emperor's arguments for this radical atheism were compelling, at least on the surface. He pointed to the religious wars that had scarred Terra's history, to the superstitions that had held humanity back from achieving its potential. He spoke of how faith in false gods had divided mankind into countless warring factions during Old Night, each convinced that their particular deity demanded the destruction of all others. Under the imperial truth, all of this would be swept away. Humanity would unite not under the banner of shared faith, but under the cold clarity of shared knowledge. Science would replace superstition. Reason would conquer fear. And in conquering fear, humanity would become strong enough to claim its birthright as the dominant species in the galaxy. This was the vision sold to the Space Marine legions as they conquered world after world during the Great Crusade. The Astartes were not merely warriors, but missionaries of a sort, carrying the light of reason to human worlds lost in the darkness of ignorance. Each world brought into imperial compliance was introduced to the imperial truth by a corps of iterators, philosophers, and rhetoricians specially trained to convince planetary populations that everything they had believed was wrong. The old religions were banned, the churches were torn down, the priests were silenced, one way or another. And in the place of faith, the Imperium offered the promise of prosperity through science, unity through shared rationality, and progress toward a future where humanity would no longer need to fear the darkness. It was a seductive vision, especially for the Astartes. These were warriors created through scientific process, their bodies transformed by genetic engineering and surgical augmentation into something far beyond natural human capacity. They were living proof that science could achieve what religion only promised. Many of them had been recruited from worlds where they had witnessed firsthand the damage done by religious extremism and superstitious violence. The imperial truth offered them a clean break from that past, a chance to build something better. And at the center of it all stood the Emperor himself, the greatest scientist humanity had ever produced, living proof that one sufficiently advanced individual could reshape entire civilizations through the application of knowledge and will. But the Dreadnoughts who remember those days also remember the questions that arose even then, long before the heresy exposed the deeper contradictions in the Emperor's vision. They remember how the imperial truth was supposedly universal and absolute, applying to all of humanity without exception. Yet the Mechanicum, the tech priests of Mars, whose assistance was absolutely essential to the Great Crusade's success, were openly religious. They worshipped the machine god, performed ritual prayers over technology, and treated scientific knowledge as sacred mysteries rather than empirical facts to be freely shared. The Emperor not only tolerated this, but formalized it in the Treaty of Mars, essentially granting the Mechanicum an exemption from the very philosophy that supposedly defined the Imperium itself. The ancient Dreadnoughts remember the discussions this caused among the legions. Why was the Mechanicum allowed to keep their faith when every other human culture encountered was forced to abandon theirs? The official explanation was pragmatic. The Imperium needed the Mechanicum's technical expertise to maintain the weapons, ships, and equipment necessary for the Great Crusade. Alienating them over theological differences would be strategically foolish. But this pragmatism created an immediate problem with the supposedly universal nature of the imperial truth. If faith was genuinely the poison the Emperor claimed, if belief in the supernatural truly weakened humanity and left it vulnerable to exploitation, then shouldn't the Mechanicum be considered a threat? How could the Emperor trust them to maintain the Imperium's most critical systems while they openly engaged in the very practices he had violently suppressed everywhere else? The Dreadnoughts also remember how unevenly the imperial truth was enforced, even among non-Mechanicum populations. On some worlds, the Imperium's forces brutally suppressed any hint of religious practice, destroying temples and executing priests with the same thoroughness they brought to exterminating Xenos. On others, especially those that accepted imperial compliance quickly and without resistance, local beliefs were tolerated as long as they didn't directly contradict the core principles of the imperial truth. Some planetary governors were allowed to maintain cultural traditions that were clearly religious in nature, as long as they avoided calling them religion and publicly endorsed the emperor's atheistic philosophy. This selective enforcement suggested that the imperial truth was less a sincere philosophical position and more a tool of political control, applied when useful and ignored when inconvenient. Perhaps most troublingly, for those who thought deeply about these matters, the Imperium itself was absolutely saturated with religious imagery and ritual despite its official atheism. The Astartes took oaths of moment, sacred vows that had all the weight and significance of religious commitments, even if they were supposedly secular in nature. The symbols of imperial authority were deliberate echoes of ancient religious iconography, from the aquila that adorned every banner to the golden eagles that topped the standards of every legion. The emperor himself was treated with a reverence that was functionally indistinguishable from worship, even though to call it such was forbidden. And as some of the more philosophically inclined legionaries pointed out, if you forbid something on pain of death and demand absolute obedience to a doctrine that cannot be questioned, you have created a religion in all but name, regardless of what you claim to believe about the supernatural. The Primarch Lorgar saw this contradiction more clearly than most. His legion, the Wordbearers, had a particular talent for recognizing the religious impulse in human societies and using it to bring worlds into compliance. But Lorgar made the mistake of being too honest about what he saw. He penned a text called the Lectitio Divinitatis that argued the emperor was worthy of worship as the one true God of humanity. This text spread rapidly through the expeditionary fleets, finding an eager audience among baseline humans who had spent their entire lives in religious cultures and were struggling to adapt to the imperial truth's harsh atheism. When the emperor learned of this, His response was devastating. He ordered the Ultramarines to destroy Monarchia, a perfect city the word-bearers had spent decades building as a monument to the Emperor's glory. The Emperor then forced Lorgar and his entire legion to kneel in the ruins, while he berated them for failing to understand his vision. The ancient Dreadnoughts remember this incident because it sent shockwaves through all the legions. The word-bearers had been among the most dedicated to the Great Crusade's mission, bringing more worlds into compliance through preaching and conversion than almost any other legion. Now they were being punished, not for failure in battle or disobedience to orders, but for interpreting the imperial truth in a way the Emperor found unacceptable. The message was clear. The Emperor's atheism was not negotiable, not even by those who sought to honor him. But the contradiction remained. If the Emperor truly believed that worship of any kind was harmful, why did he demand and accept the absolute loyalty and reverence of his sons? If faith was truly a poison, why did the Imperium function through rituals and symbols that were identical in form and function to religious practices? The answers to these questions, the ancient Dreadnoughts came to understand, lay in secrets the Emperor had not shared with anyone, not even his gene-crafted sons. The imperial truth was not the ultimate goal of the Great Crusade. It was a means to an end, a tool being used to achieve a deeper purpose that the Emperor kept hidden even from those who fought and died in his name. And it was this hidden purpose, this great secret project that consumed the Emperor's attention after the Ulnar Crusade, that would ultimately reveal how little of the real plan had ever been shared with those who were expected to execute it. The Emperor's hidden purpose. After approximately 2 centuries of leading the Great Crusade personally, commanding the expeditionary fleets from the front lines, and overseeing the expansion of the Imperium across the galaxy, the Emperor made a decision that baffled and hurt many of his sons. Following the great victory at Ullanor, where the largest orc, WH40K, ever encountered, was crushed and the greenskin threat pushed back from the expanding borders of the Imperium, the Emperor announced he was returning to Terra. He named Horus as War Master, granting him authority over all the other Primarchs and the power to command the Great Crusade in his absence. Then the Master of Mankind withdrew to the Imperial Palace and essentially disappeared from the visible prosecution of the war he had started. The Emperor offered no detailed explanation for this decision. He simply stated that he had important work to attend to on Terra, work that required his personal attention and could not be delegated. The Primarchs were told to continue the Great Crusade without him, to bring the remaining human worlds into compliance, and establish the Imperium as the dominant power in the galaxy. Once this was accomplished, the Emperor assured them, he would reveal the next phase of his grand plan for humanity's future. But what that plan entailed, what was so important that it required the Emperor to abandon the conquest he had personally initiated, this he did not explain. Not to Horus, his chosen war master, not to the other Primarchs, his gene-crafted sons, who had been designed specifically to execute his will, not to the legions, who had fought for 2 centuries believing they were building toward a specific vision that their father would eventually reveal in full. The ancient Dreadnoughts remember the confusion and resentment this caused, even among the most loyal of the legions. The Emperor had been more than their commander. He had been the living embodiment of everything the Imperium stood for, the greatest psyker and scientist humanity had ever produced, the architect of a future that would see mankind ascend to dominance over the galaxy. His presence had united the disparate personalities and philosophies of the Primarchs, giving them a common purpose that transcended their individual differences. Now he was gone, offering no explanation beyond vague assurances that his work on Terra was necessary. Many of the Primarchs felt abandoned, some felt betrayed. Horus, despite the honor of his new position, struggled with the weight of command and the suspicion that the Emperor no longer trusted them to understand his true intentions. What the Emperor did not tell anyone, what he kept hidden even from those closest to him, was that he was working on a project so ambitious and so dangerous that its success or failure would determine humanity's ultimate fate. Deep beneath the imperial palace, in chambers sealed against all intrusion, the emperor was attempting something that had never been accomplished before. He was trying to gain humanity access to the webway. The webway was an ancient network of tunnels that existed outside normal space, constructed eons ago by the Old Ones and later inherited by the Eldari. It allowed instantaneous travel between distant locations without the need to enter the warp, that roiling dimension of psychic energy where the nightmares of sentient minds took on terrible reality as the Chaos Gods and their demonic servants. The webway was how the ancient Eldari had built and maintained their galaxy-spanning civilization. It was the secret to their power, allowing them to move armies and resources across vast distances while avoiding the dangers that made warp travel so perilous for younger races. And it was precisely what humanity needed if the Emperor's ultimate vision was to be realized. The Emperor had discovered an ancient artifact on Terra, a device from the Dark Age of technology called the Golden Throne. This machine, whose original purpose was lost to history, could potentially be modified to create a portal into the webway. But the task was monumentally difficult. The webway's tunnels were constructed from psychically resistant materials that protected travelers from the predatory entities that dwelt in the warp. Humanity did not possess the technology to replicate these materials. Any new tunnels humanity constructed would be vulnerable to warp intrusion unless they were actively shielded by a psyker powerful enough to hold back the full force of chaos. And the only psyker with sufficient power for such a task was the Emperor himself. This was why he had returned to Terra. This was why he had essentially sequestered himself in the dungeons beneath the Imperial Palace, spending every moment working on the Golden Throne and the modifications necessary to make it functional. The Emperor sat upon the throne, using his immense psychic might to create and maintain a portal into the webway, then to extend new tunnels that would connect the network to key Imperial worlds. It was exhausting work that required his constant attention and concentration. He could not leave the throne for more than brief periods without risking catastrophic failure of the psychic shields protecting the new tunnels from demonic invasion. This was the real reason the Great Crusade had to continue without him. This was the secret work that was supposedly more important than leading his sons to victory. But why had the Emperor kept this secret? Why not explain to the Primarchs, or at least to Horus as War Master, what he was attempting and why it mattered so much? The official explanation, offered later by those few who knew of the project, was that the Emperor feared the navigator houses discovering his plan. The navigators held a monopoly on interstellar travel through their unique ability to perceive the Astronomicon and guide ships through the warp. If the Webway project succeeded, their services would become obsolete, and their power would evaporate overnight. The Paternova of the navigators was known to have dispatched agents to sabotage prototypes related to the Golden Throne, suggesting the Emperor's fears were not unfounded. But this explanation satisfied no one who thought deeply about it. The Primarchs were loyal beyond question, at least before the seeds of the heresy were planted. None of them would have betrayed the Emperor's plans to the navigators or anyone else. Keeping the project secret from the navigators did not require keeping it secret from his own sons. Moreover, the explanation fails to account for why the Emperor kept the secret from the Custodian Guard, his most loyal warriors, or from Malcador, the Sigillite, his closest advisor, who already knew countless other secrets. The selective secrecy suggested there were other reasons, deeper reasons, for the Emperor's silence. The ancient Dreadnoughts, who knew of the Webway project, who learned of it later through fragments of information shared by those who had been involved, understood something that the official histories glossed over. The Webway was not the end goal. It was a tool, a means to achieve something even more ambitious and more dangerous. The Emperor's ultimate plan was to guide humanity's evolution into a fully psychic race, to transform the species so that every human possessed the kind of powers that currently manifested only in psychers. This transformation would, the Emperor believed, allow humanity to ascend to a level of power and sophistication that would make them the dominant force in the galaxy, perhaps even rivals to the ancient Aeldari at the height of their civilization. But this plan had one absolutely critical requirement. It had to be accomplished without empowering the Chaos Gods. The ruinous powers drew their strength from the emotions and beliefs of sentient beings, feeding on the psychic resonance created by faith, passion, and thought. Every prayer offered, every ritual performed, every moment of worship or devotion sent power flowing into the warp to sustain the entities that dwelt there. If humanity evolved into a psychic race while still bound to the warp through traditional means of interstellar travel and communication, the Chaos Gods would become immeasurably more powerful, potentially powerful enough to devour humanity entirely as they had devoured the Eldari. This was the real reason for the Imperial truth. This was why the Emperor had suppressed religion with such fanatical zeal. It was not because he genuinely believed faith was merely superstition, though he certainly had little patience for supernatural explanations when scientific ones sufficed. It was because he knew, with a certainty born of direct experience, that worship empowered chaos. Every act of faith, no matter how sincere or well-intentioned, fed the dark gods. The Imperial truth was designed to starve them, to cut off the flow of psychic energy that sustained their existence. And the Webway would complete the strategy by severing humanity's direct connection to the warp, allowing the species to evolve in isolation from the entities that would otherwise corrupt and consume them. This was the grand plan. This was what the Emperor had been working toward since before the unification wars on Terra. Everything else, the Space Marine legions, the Great Crusade, the conquest of the galaxy, all of it was preliminary. All of it was building toward this singular goal: transform humanity into a psychic species powerful enough to dominate the galaxy, while simultaneously protecting them from the Chaos Gods who would otherwise destroy them. It was an audacious vision, perhaps the most ambitious project ever conceived by any being in the galaxy's history. And it was a secret the Emperor kept from almost everyone, even those whose entire existence had been engineered to help him achieve it. The ancient Dreadnoughts learned these truths in fragments, piecing together the reality from conversations overheard, from orders given and later regretted, from the behavior of the Emperor and his inner circle during the critical moments before everything fell apart. They understood, as few others did, the full scope of what the Emperor had attempted. They also understood, with a clarity born of 10,000 years of watching the consequences unfold, exactly why he had failed. The witnesses and what they saw. The Great Crusade Dreadnoughts occupied a unique position in the hierarchy of the legions. They were veterans of the earliest campaigns, warriors who had proven themselves worthy of preservation when mortal wounds should have ended their service. But more than that, they were present at moments when the ordinary Astartes were not, awakened for battles where their ancient wisdom and tactical experience could make the difference between victory and defeat. This meant they witnessed conversations and events that were not recorded in official histories, saw the Emperor and his advisors in moments when the careful public facade slipped, revealing glimpses of the deeper truths beneath. Consider the position of a dreadnought during the Great Crusade. When awakened for battle, they would be brought into the command structure as advisors, their centuries of experience valued by younger officers who sought their counsel. They stood in planning chambers where strategy was debated and decisions made. They heard the Primarchs speak among themselves, sometimes forgetting that the ancient warrior in the corner, silent within his armored shell, was listening and remembering everything. They were present during embarkations and deployments, privy to conversations that younger Marines never heard, because no one thought to guard their words around a machine that was considered more relic than person. And occasionally, in rare and precious moments, they spoke with the Emperor himself. The Master of Mankind made it a practice to visit the ancient warriors of his legions when opportunity allowed, honoring them as embodiments of the Imperium's fighting spirit. These visits were brief, usually consisting of formal words of praise and encouragement. But sometimes, especially in the early days of the Crusade, when there were fewer dreadnoughts, and each one was more personally known to the Emperor, the conversations went deeper. The Emperor would ask them what they had seen, what they thought of the Crusade's progress, whether they believed the younger generation of Astartes understood what they were fighting for. The ancient dreadnoughts remember these conversations with perfect clarity, every word preserved in memory, enhanced by the dreadnoughts' recording systems. They remember the Emperor's voice, that carefully modulated tone that could inspire total loyalty or cut like a knife depending on his intention. They remember the questions he asked, probing and specific, seeking information rather than simply making speeches. And they remember the moments when the Emperor's mask slipped, when frustration or concern showed through the carefully maintained facade of absolute confidence. These were the moments when the dreadnoughts began to understand that the Emperor's public statements about the Great Crusade's purpose did not tell the complete story. One such moment came during the early years of the Crusade, when a veteran dreadnought of the Iron Warriors asked the Emperor about the destruction of religious sites on a newly compliant world. The dreadnought had witnessed the systematic demolition of temples that were architectural marvels, centuries old and of significant cultural value to the local population. The warriors doing the demolishing were enthusiastic in their work, treating it as a crusade within the crusade, but the dreadnought questioned whether such thoroughness was necessary. Could the temples not be repurposed as museums or administrative centers, preserving the architecture while stripping away the religious function? The Emperor's response was carefully phrased but revealing. He explained that the templates themselves were dangerous, that the architecture was designed to evoke specific emotional responses that reinforced religious thinking. The human mind was susceptible to such manipulation, he said, and removing the temptation entirely was more effective than trying to repurpose it. Then he added something that stayed with the dreadnought for the next 10 millennia. He said that humanity had to be protected from its own weakness. That faith was an addiction that required not just treatment, but the removal of all access to the addictive substance. The species had to go through withdrawal, painful though it might be, before it could be trusted with the next phase of its evolution. The dreadnought asked what that next phase might be. The Emperor smiled and said simply, "Ascension." Then he changed the subject, moving on to tactical discussions about the campaign ahead. But the ancient warrior in his armored shell had already learned something important. The imperial truth was not the end goal. It was preparation for something else, something the Emperor believed required humanity to be completely severed from its religious impulses before it could be revealed or attempted. Other dreadnoughts remember similar moments, brief glimpses behind the curtain of the Emperor's grand design. They remember a conversation where the Emperor spoke about the webway, mentioning it almost casually in the context of discussing logistics for the Great Crusade. One of the dreadnoughts asked how humanity might gain access to such technology, given that it was an Eldari creation, and the Xenos were notoriously protective of their secrets. The Emperor replied that humanity had its own means of accessing the webway, that ancient artifacts from the Dark Age of technology could be modified for the purpose. He said this with such confidence that it was clear he had already begun working on the project, even though this conversation took place decades before he would officially announce his return to Terra. The ancient warriors also remember the inconsistencies in how the imperial truth was enforced, and more importantly, they remember the explanations offered when these inconsistencies were questioned. The Emperor was pragmatic about the Mechanicum exemption, acknowledging that their religious practices were regrettable but necessary, given the Imperium's dependence on their technical expertise. But when pressed on whether this meant the imperial truth was negotiable, whether it could be adapted or compromised in other contexts where political considerations required flexibility, the Emperor's response was absolute. The Mechanicum, he explained, worshipped the machine rather than beings that dwelt in the warp. Their faith, misguided though it was, did not empower chaos in the same way that worship of gods or spirits did. It was a distinction that few of the dreadnoughts found convincing, But it revealed something about the Emperor's real priorities. He was not actually opposed to all faith. He was opposed to faith that fed the Chaos Gods. This realization, connecting the seemingly arbitrary rules of the imperial truth to a deeper concern about empowering chaos, was one that many of the ancient dreadnoughts made independently as they watched the Great Crusade unfold. The Emperor's absolute prohibition on certain practices, his tolerance of others, the specific way he phrased his objections to religion, all of it pointed toward a hidden truth that he was not sharing openly. He knew about chaos. He understood the danger in a way that even the Primarchs did not, at least not initially. And everything about the imperial truth, from its harsh atheism to its selective enforcement, was designed with one primary goal: deny the ruinous powers the worship they needed to maintain their strength. But the Dreadnoughts also understood something else, something that would become tragically clear only after the heresy tore the Imperium apart. The Emperor's secrecy, his refusal to explain his real goals, even to his most trusted sons, was not wisdom. It was a catastrophic mistake. By keeping the truth hidden, he had created the conditions for doubt and resentment to grow among the Primarchs. Horus felt abandoned when the Emperor returned to Terra without explanation. Lorgar felt betrayed when his worship was rejected without a clear explanation of why faith was so dangerous. Magnus the Red sought forbidden knowledge because he had not been trusted with the legitimate knowledge of what the Emperor was actually attempting in the Imperial Palace. The secrecy that was meant to protect the project had instead created the perfect conditions for chaos to exploit. And the ancient dreadnoughts watched it happen. They saw the seeds of the heresy being planted, understanding as they observed that the Emperor's greatest plans were being undermined by his refusal to share those plans with the sons he had created to help him achieve them. They wanted to speak, to warn someone that the strategy of secrecy was failing. But they were dreadnoughts, ancient relics whose counsel was sought only on tactical matters. Who would listen to them about grand strategy and the politics of demigods? So they remained silent, watching as the Imperium stumbled toward the abyss, knowing that the catastrophe about to unfold could have been prevented if only the Emperor had been willing to trust his sons with the truth of what he was trying to accomplish. After the heresy, the tragedy complete, when the Horus heresy finally ended, when the War Master was dead and the Emperor was entombed upon the Golden Throne and the traitor legions were scattered into the Eye of Terror, the ancient dreadnoughts who survived faced a galaxy transformed beyond recognition. The Imperium they had fought to build was shattered. Half the Space Marine legions had turned traitor. The most brilliant of the Primarchs were dead or corrupted beyond redemption. And the Emperor himself, the architect of humanity's ascension, was reduced to a barely living corpse, sustained by machines and the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every day. Worst of all, from the perspective of those who understood what the Emperor had truly wanted, was what humanity had become in the absence of his guidance. The imperial cult, that religion which the Emperor had so vigorously suppressed, which he had torn down churches to prevent, which he had destroyed monarchia to punish, had become the dominant ideology of the Imperium. The Emperor, who had insisted he was not a god and had rejected all worship, was now worshipped as the God Emperor by trillions of faithful across the galaxy. The imperial truth, that cornerstone of his vision for humanity's future, had been completely abandoned in favor of religious dogma that would have horrified him had he been able to speak. The ancient dreadnoughts watched this transformation with a growing sense of bitter irony. The Emperor had failed in the most fundamental way possible. His grand plan to protect humanity from chaos by denying the dark gods the worship they needed had collapsed, and in its place arose a religious fervor that fed the ruinous powers more efficiently than any previous human civilization had managed. Every prayer offered to the God Emperor sent psychic energy flowing into the warp. Every church built in his name, every shrine erected to his glory, every martyr who died calling on his divine protection, all of it empowered chaos, even as the faithful believed they were serving the Emperor's will. And the Dreadnoughts knew, with absolute certainty, that the Emperor would have been horrified by this outcome. They had heard him speak about the dangers of worship. They had seen his reaction to Lorgar's attempts to deify him. They knew beyond any doubt that the current state of the Imperium was the exact opposite of what he had fought to achieve. But what could they say? Who would listen? The Imperium of the 41st Millennium had no place for the truth the ancient Dreadnoughts possessed. The lie had become too useful, too necessary for the Imperium's survival to be questioned or undermined. Because here was the terrible truth that the ancient Dreadnoughts eventually came to understand. The Imperium needed the Imperial cult. Without the unifying force of shared faith in the God Emperor, the million worlds of humanity would have nothing holding them together. The rational philosophy of the Imperial truth had required the Emperor's personal presence and authority to maintain. With him gone, silence upon the Golden Throne, there was no one with sufficient authority to enforce atheism against the deep human need for faith and meaning. The Imperial cult had filled that void, and in doing so had become the glue holding the Imperium together against forces that would tear it apart. The ancient Dreadnoughts had to watch as generation after generation of Space Marines were indoctrinated into beliefs that contradicted everything the Emperor had taught during the Great Crusade. They had to listen as chaplains preached about the Emperor's divinity, about how faith in the God Emperor protected the faithful from the corrupting influence of chaos, about how the Emperor had always been destined to ascend to godhood and now watched over his children from his throne of gold. These teachings were presented as ancient truth, as if they had always been the foundation of the Imperium, as if the imperial truth had never existed or had been merely a temporary measure until humanity was ready to embrace its God. And the terrible thing, the thing that made the ancient Dreadnoughts' knowledge so heavy and so dangerous, was that the chaplains were not entirely wrong. Faith in the Emperor did seem to provide some protection against chaos corruption. Worlds with strong imperial cult presence were measurably more resistant to chaos infiltration than those where faith was weak or divided. The belief that the Emperor was watching over humanity, protecting it from the darkness, created a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, where that belief itself generated psychic resistance to chaos influence. It was as if the collective faith of trillions of humans had created something real in the warp, a reflection of the Emperor that existed independent of his physical form and acted according to how the faithful believed he should act. This was the ultimate irony, and the ancient Dreadnoughts were perhaps the only ones who fully appreciated its bitter completeness. The Emperor had tried to deny chaos by starving them of worship. He had failed, and the Imperium had embraced worship more thoroughly than any previous human civilization. But somehow, in failing so completely that his own desired outcome was reversed, the Emperor had achieved a kind of victory anyway. The worship that empowered chaos also empowered something that resisted chaos, a reflection or echo of the Emperor in the warp that pushed back against the ruinous powers. It was not the clean, rational solution he had envisioned. It was messy, paradoxical, and sustained through continuous sacrifice and suffering. But it worked, after a fashion, in a way that his original plan never could have. So what were the ancient Dreadnoughts to do with this knowledge? Reveal the truth about the imperial truth and risk undermining the faith that held the Imperium together? Explain that the God Emperor worshipped by trillions was actually an atheist who would have rejected their prayers with disgust? Teach the younger generations of Space Marines that everything they believed about their holy mission was based on a misunderstanding of what the Emperor actually wanted. The consequences of such revelations would be catastrophic. The Imperium was already teetering on the edge of collapse, held together by faith and tradition and the shared belief that they were serving the Emperor's divine will. Remove that belief, replace it with the knowledge that they were actually betraying what he wanted, and the whole structure might crumble into civil war and chaos. This is the burden the ancient Dreadnoughts have carried for 10,000 years. They know the truth. They remember the Emperor as he was, not as the Imperium imagines him to be. They understand what he truly wanted and how completely the Imperium has failed to achieve it. But they also understand that revealing this truth would do more harm than good, that some knowledge is too dangerous to share, that the Imperium's survival depends on lies they have the power to expose, but lack the right to destroy. So they remain silent, or nearly so. They tell stories of the Great Crusade, yes, but they carefully select which stories to tell. They speak of battles and tactics, of the Primarch's brilliance and the Emperor's strategic genius. They honor the memory of brothers long dead and keep alive the traditions of their legions and chapters. But when asked direct questions about what the Emperor truly wanted, about why he created the Imperium the way he did, about what his ultimate goals were for humanity, their voices become carefully vague. They speak in generalities about unity and strength, about mankind claiming its rightful place among the stars. They do not speak about the Imperial Truth's real purpose or the Webway Project's ultimate goal. They certainly do not speak about how the current Imperium represents the complete failure of the Emperor's actual vision. And when younger Space Marines, confused by the ancient Dreadnoughts' carefully measured words, ask them directly to explain the contradictions they sense, the ancient warriors have learned to deflect. They say that the times were different, that modern Astartes cannot truly understand the Great Crusade without having lived through it, that some truths are best left to those who were there. It is not lying, precisely. It is simply refusing to tell the complete truth, choosing silence over revelation, protecting the Imperium from knowledge that would tear it apart. This is why the Great Crusade Dreadnoughts will not say what the Emperor really wanted. Not because they do not know, not because they have forgotten, but because they know too well, and they understand that the truth they possess is more dangerous than any weapon in the Imperium's arsenal. Better to remain silent, to carry this burden alone, than to speak and watch the Imperium destroy itself with the knowledge of how completely it has failed to achieve what it was created to accomplish. The oldest voice, Bjorn the Fell-Handed. If there is any Dreadnought who could reveal the full truth about the Emperor's intentions and the Great Crusade's real purpose, it is Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves. Bjorn is unique among all the ancient warriors of the Adeptus Astartes. He is not merely old, not merely a veteran of the Great Crusade. He is the oldest, the last living Space Marine who can personally claim to have fought beside the Emperor himself, to have served in the Wolf King Leman Russ's personal guard, to have witnessed the birth of the Imperium and survived its 10,000-year decline. When Bjorn speaks, even the most prideful Space Marine listens in respectful silence. For this is a voice from the Age of Legends, the last living link to a time when Primarchs walked among their sons, and the Emperor's vision for humanity seemed achievable. Bjorn's memory, unlike that of many ancient Dreadnoughts, remains remarkably clear, despite the immense span of years he has endured. When awakened from his long sleeps, to advise the Space Wolves in times of crisis, he speaks with authority and precision about events that occurred 10 millennia ago, recounting details that would have been lost to history without his testimony. The youngest Bloodclaws, hearing his stories for the first time, struggle to believe they are hearing true recollections rather than legends embellished by centuries of retelling. But Bjorn's stories are true, and he speaks with the certainty of one who was there, who saw with his own eyes and heard with his own ears the things he describes. Yet even Bjorn, the eldest and most honored of all the ancient Dreadnoughts, carefully controls what he reveals. He will tell stories about Leman Russ, about the Wolf King's fierce loyalty to the Emperor and his complicated relationship with his brother Primarchs. He will describe battles fought across hundreds of worlds, the enemies defeated and the victories won. He will speak of the camaraderie of the legions before the heresy, when Space Marines of different legions fought side by side as brothers rather than regarding each other with the suspicion that would come later. His voice carries the weight of lived experience, and every word is treasured by those fortunate enough to hear him speak. But there is one subject where Bjorn's voice falters, where the certainty and clarity that normally characterizes his speech breaks down into something more painful and more profound. When he speaks of Leman Russ's departure into the Eye of Terror, when he recounts his own appointment as the first Great Wolf of the Space Wolves chapter, when he remembers being left behind while his Primarch and his closest brothers ventured into the warp on a quest from which they never returned, Bjorn's mechanical voice takes on a quality that transcends its artificial nature. Those who have heard him speak of these events describe it as hearing a soul in torment, grief and loss bleeding through the layers of ceramite and adamantium that separate Bjorn from the world. This moment of vulnerability, this crack in Bjorn's otherwise unshakable certainty, is the closest he comes to revealing his true thoughts about the Emperor's plan and its ultimate failure. Bjorn was there when Russ made the decision to abandon his chapter and seek the Emperor in the warp. He heard the Wolf King's reasons, saw the desperation in his Primarch's eyes as Russ tried to explain why he had to leave, why finding a path to the Emperor was more important than remaining with his sons. And Bjorn understood, perhaps better than Russ himself, that this quest was born from the failure of everything the Emperor had tried to accomplish. The Primarch was searching for answers, trying to understand where things had gone wrong and whether there was any way to salvage the wreckage of the Emperor's dream. But Bjorn will not speak of this understanding. When questioned about Russ's departure, he tells only the surface facts. The Wolf King left to search for the Emperor. He took his most loyal warriors with him. He promised to return. He never did. These statements are true as far as they go, but they conceal depths of meaning that Bjorn refuses to explore in his public reminiscences. Why did Russ believe he could find the Emperor in the warp when the Emperor sat upon the golden throne on Terra? What did the Primarch hope to accomplish through this quest? What did he know or suspect about the Emperor's true nature and intentions that drove him to abandon everything else in search of answers? Bjorn knows. He was in the Wolf King's confidence during those final days before the departure. He heard things that were never recorded in any official history, but he will not share this knowledge, not even with the Space Wolves who regard him as the keeper of their chapter's truest history. This is Bjorn's burden, perhaps heavier even than the knowledge carried by other ancient Dreadnoughts, because Bjorn does not merely know what the Emperor wanted. He knows what the Primarch suspected, what Leman Russ believed had gone wrong, what drove the Wolf King to abandon his chapter in a desperate quest that Bjorn, even after 10,000 years, cannot bring himself to fully describe. The only hints Bjorn gives come in unguarded moments when the weight of his memories becomes too heavy to contain entirely. He has been known to speak, seemingly to himself rather than to any audience, about the futility of great plans and grand visions. He has muttered, in the mechanical voice that somehow conveys deep bitterness, about secrets kept and trust betrayed. He has said, more than once, when he thought no one was recording his words, that the Emperor should have trusted his sons, should have explained what he was attempting, should have been honest about the dangers they faced, rather than trying to protect them from knowledge they deserved to possess. These fragments, these brief glimpses behind the wall of Bjorn's careful silence, are all that the Space Wolves have to suggest that their most ancient brother carries truths too dangerous to speak openly. The current Great Wolf, like his predecessors for 10,000 years, has learned not to push Bjorn too hard on these matters. The eldest has given his entire existence to the defense of the Imperium and the preservation of the Space Wolves' honor and traditions. If he believes some truths should remain unspoken, then he has earned the right to keep his silence, even if that silence leaves questions unanswered and mysteries unsolved. But Bjorn knows that his silence will not last forever. He is old beyond measure, and even Dreadnoughts do not last eternally. Eventually, the systems that keep him alive will fail beyond repair. or the organic components of his body will decay past the point where even the most advanced life support can sustain them. When that day comes, the last living voice of the Great Crusade will be silenced, and with it will die knowledge that exists nowhere else. Bjorn has considered, more than once during his long centuries of service, whether he should record a full testimony before that final day arrives. He could speak everything he knows into a data archive, sealed with the strongest encryption, to be opened only by future great wolves when they judge the time is right. But each time Bjorn considers this possibility, he returns to the same conclusion. The knowledge he possesses is too dangerous, not for him, not for the Space Wolves, but for the Imperium as a whole. If his testimony were to become public, if the truth about the Emperor's real goals and the complete failure to achieve them became widely known, the consequences would be catastrophic. Better that the knowledge dies with him. Better that future generations struggle with incomplete histories and fragmentary records than inherit a truth that could destroy the faith holding the Imperium together. So Bjorn continues his pattern of measured revelation and careful silence, telling stories that inspire the young warriors of his chapter, while concealing truths that would shake the foundations of everything they believe. He has become, over 10,000 years of service, the perfect keeper of dangerous knowledge, completely trustworthy because he understands exactly why the truth must remain hidden, yet burdened by that understanding in ways that those who seek his counsel can only dimly perceive. The eldest speaks, and the Space Wolves listen in reverent silence, but they do not hear what he is not saying, and they do not understand that the greatest wisdom Bjorn has to offer is the wisdom of knowing what should not be spoken. The traitor's perspective. There is a particular cruelty in the way knowledge is distributed across the surviving dreadnoughts of the Great Crusade era. The loyalists, those who remained true to the Emperor and the Imperium, are bound by duty and honor to protect the institution they serve, which means carefully controlling what they reveal about its flawed foundations. But the traitors, the dreadnoughts of the Chaos Space Marine legions who followed their primarchs into damnation, labor under no such restrictions. They have spent 10,000 years in the Eye of Terror, transformed by the corrupting influence of chaos into something that barely resembles what they once were, and in their corruption, they have gained a perverse freedom to speak truths that their loyalist counterparts must conceal. The Chaos Dreadnoughts, those ancient warriors who have become hellbrutes, and worse, through prolonged exposure to the warp's influence, are not reliable narrators. Their minds have been twisted by chaos, their memories corrupted by demonic influence, their motivations warped beyond anything their younger selves would recognize. They rage against the Imperium and the Emperor with a hatred that goes beyond reason, driven by 10,000 years of bitterness and the whispers of the dark gods. Everything they say must be filtered through the knowledge that they are, fundamentally, compromised witnesses whose testimony serves the interests of the ruinous powers. Yet even accounting for all of this, even recognizing that their words are poison designed to corrupt and destroy, the Chaos Dreadnoughts speak truths that the Loyalists will not. They mock the Emperor's plan to starve chaos through the Imperial truth, pointing out with savage glee how completely it failed. They describe the Webway project, which they learned about only after their corruption, but have since studied obsessively, highlighting every flaw in its conception and execution. They speak of the Emperor's arrogance in thinking he could guide humanity's evolution while keeping his plans secret from those he expected to die in service to those plans. And they do all of this, not out of some commitment to truth or justice, but because they know how deeply such revelations would wound the Loyalists if they allowed themselves to believe. The most sophisticated among the Chaos Dreadnoughts have learned to weaponize this knowledge. They understand that the Loyalists who know the truth must remain silent to protect the Imperium, which means the Loyalists cannot directly refute the claims made by traitors who no longer care about consequences. This creates a kind of asymmetric warfare where the truth becomes a weapon that only one side can wield freely. When a Chaos Dreadnought encounters a loyalist ancient in battle, the physical combat is often secondary to the psychological warfare. The traitor will speak of the Emperor's failures, describe the contradictions in his plan, mock the faith that sustains the Imperium as a betrayal of everything the Emperor actually wanted. And the loyalist can say nothing in response, because to defend the Emperor's real vision would require admitting how completely the current Imperium fails to embody it. This is particularly painful when the Chaos Dreadnought speaking is one who remembers the same events as the loyalist he faces. They served in different legions perhaps, but fought in the same campaigns, heard the same speeches, witnessed the same contradictions. The traitor can say, "You remember, brother, you know I speak truth. The Emperor lied to us about what he wanted, what he was doing, why he needed us to conquer the galaxy for him. We were pawns in a game we didn't understand, and when we tried to understand, when we sought the knowledge he kept from us, we were punished for our curiosity. At least in chaos, we found gods who do not hide their nature or conceal their intentions." And the loyalist dreadnought must remain silent, or respond only with the official ideology that both of them know is a comfortable lie. He cannot say, "Yes, the Emperor hid his true intentions, but he did so to protect us from knowledge that would have corrupted us." He cannot admit, "The imperial truth was a tool, not an end in itself, meant to accomplish something greater that we were not ready to understand." To speak such things, even in refutation of chaos propaganda, would be to acknowledge that the propaganda contains truth. Better to respond with bolt of fire and plasma cannon, to drown the words in violence before they can take root in minds that might be vulnerable to such seeds of doubt. The tragedy is that the Chaos Dreadnoughts are not entirely wrong in their accusations. The Emperor did keep secrets from his sons. He did refuse to explain his real goals, even to those who deserved to know. He did create a situation where Magnus the Red felt compelled to seek forbidden knowledge because legitimate knowledge was denied to him, where Lorgar felt betrayed and abandoned because he could not understand why his worship was rejected, where Horus felt confused and resentful because he was expected to prosecute a war without understanding its ultimate purpose. The secrecy that the Emperor maintained, that seemed so necessary to protect the Webway project, and the plan to elevate humanity, created the conditions that allowed chaos to corrupt half the legions and shatter the Imperium. But acknowledging this, even in the privacy of their own thoughts, is almost unbearably painful for the loyalist dreadnoughts who understand it. They gave everything for the Emperor's vision. They accepted internment in walking tombs rather than die, believing that their continued service would help achieve the future he promised. They have endured 10,000 years of isolation and suffering, waking to fight battles in an Imperium that bears little resemblance to the one they helped create, watching the slow decay of everything they once held dear. To admit that all of this might have been prevented if the Emperor had simply trusted his sons with the truth, if he had been willing to explain rather than command, if he had treated the Primarchs as partners in his grand design rather than tools to be used without understanding, this admission would render their sacrifice meaningless. So they cannot admit it. They cannot acknowledge what the Chaos Dreadnoughts mockingly proclaim, even though they know in their hearts that the accusation contains truth. All they can do is continue fighting, continue serving, continue maintaining the silence that protects the Imperium from knowledge of its own founding failures. And in doing so, they become complicit in the very secrecy that destroyed the Emperor's plan in the first place, perpetuating across 10,000 years the pattern of concealment and partial truth that Chaos exploited to bring about the heresy. This is perhaps the deepest tragedy of the ancient Dreadnoughts' position. They learned, through the catastrophe of the heresy, that secrecy and hidden knowledge could be exploited by Chaos to corrupt even the most loyal servants of the Emperor. They watched as the refusal to share critical information created the conditions for betrayal and civil war. They understood, too late, that trust and transparency might have saved everything. Yet now, they find themselves in a position where they must maintain secrecy about different truths, must keep hidden different knowledge, for the same basic reason the Emperor once gave, because revealing it would cause more harm than good. They have become the thing they once might have criticized, guardians of dangerous truth who believe that ignorance is the only protection available to those they serve. And the Chaos Dreadnoughts know this. They understand the bind the Loyalists are in, and they take savage pleasure in exploiting it. Every battle between ancient warriors who once fought on the same side becomes an opportunity to twist the knife, to force the Loyalists to confront truths they cannot acknowledge, to mock the choices that honor and duty require them to make. The Chaos Dreadnoughts have no solutions to offer, no genuine wisdom to share. They simply want to spread the misery of their own damnation, to make the Loyalists taste something of the bitterness that has sustained the traitors through 10 millennia of spite and hatred. And so the asymmetric war of words continues, with truth as the primary weapon in an arsenal of psychological torture. The traitors speak what the Loyalists know but cannot say. The Loyalists maintain silence about what the traitors proclaim. Neither side achieves victory because the real battle is not between them, but within the hearts of every Space Marine who hears these exchanges and wonders which side is telling the complete truth. The ancient dreadnoughts on both sides carry the memory of the Great Crusade forward, but they carry it as a wound rather than a blessing, knowledge that poisons rather than enlightens, truth that must be hidden or weaponized, but cannot be freely shared for the benefit of those who come after. The necessity of the lie. After 10,000 years of watching the Imperium struggle to survive, the ancient dreadnoughts have come to understand something that would have seemed impossible during the Great Crusade. They have learned that sometimes lies are necessary, that truth can be a luxury that civilization cannot afford, that the myths that bind humanity together are more important than the historical facts that would tear those myths apart. This understanding is not corruption or cowardice. It is hard-won wisdom born from watching what happens when uncomfortable truths collide with desperate people's need for hope and meaning. The imperial cult, from the perspective of those who remember the imperial truth, is a comprehensive betrayal of everything the emperor claimed to want. He spent centuries suppressing religion, destroying churches, forcing populations to abandon their faith and embrace rationalist atheism. He did this, the Dreadnoughts know, because he believed that worship empowered chaos, that every prayer sent psychic energy flowing into the warp to sustain the dark gods. The imperial truth was his attempt to starve chaos by denying them the faith they fed upon. By this measure, the imperial cult represents complete and total failure. Trillions of humans now worship the emperor as a god, offering him exactly the kind of reverence he spent the Great Crusade trying to eliminate. But the ancient dreadnoughts have also watched what this faith accomplishes. They have seen worlds facing demonic invasion hold out longer because the population's faith in the emperor gave them courage to resist. They have witnessed Space Marines drawing on their belief in the God Emperor to resist chaos corruption that might otherwise have claimed them. They have observed that the most faithful imperial worlds tend to be the most resistant to chaos infiltration, while worlds where faith is weak or divided fall more easily to the ruinous powers. The correlation is clear, even if the mechanism is not fully understood. Faith in the emperor, however much it might have horrified him, provides genuine protection against the very forces he sought to deny through the imperial truth. More than that, the imperial cult gives the Imperium something the imperial truth never could: unity without the emperor's personal presence. The imperial truth required active enforcement by someone with the authority and power to make humanity accept it against their instinctive desire for faith and meaning. The emperor had that authority and power, but no one else did. Certainly not after his internment on the Golden Throne removed him from the visible governance of the Imperium. Without his active enforcement, the imperial truth would have collapsed within generations, replaced by 1,000 competing faiths and ideologies that would have torn humanity apart as they competed for dominance. The imperial cult filled that vacuum. It provided a common mythology that could be shared across 1,000,000 worlds, a faith that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers because it focused on a single figure that everyone agreed was worthy of worship. It gave humanity something to unite around, a shared purpose and identity that held disparate populations together, even when the Imperium's physical infrastructure collapsed. On worlds cut off from the rest of humanity by warp storms or Xenos invasions, the Imperial cult maintained the population's identification with the Imperium and their willingness to resist when they could easily have surrendered or negotiated with the enemy. The faith that the Emperor had tried to suppress became the Imperium's most effective tool for maintaining cohesion across the vast distances and incomprehensible diversity of human civilization. The ancient Dreadnoughts have had 10,000 years to contemplate this irony. The Emperor's plan failed completely, yet somehow in failing, it created something that worked in ways his original vision never could have. The careful strategy of denying chaos through rational atheism was abandoned, replaced by a religious fervor that fed the dark gods even as it resisted them. It was messy, paradoxical, and completely contrary to what the Emperor had wanted, but it allowed humanity to survive when survival seemed impossible, to maintain unity when fragmentation should have destroyed them. Faced with this reality, what could the ancient Dreadnoughts do except accept that the lie was necessary? This acceptance does not come without cost. Every time an ancient Dreadnought listens to a chaplain preach about the Emperor's divinity, every time he hears young Space Marines talk about serving the God Emperor's holy will, every time he witnesses the religious rituals that now permeate every aspect of Imperial military and civilian life, he must suppress the knowledge of what the Emperor actually believed and wanted. He must watch the systematic betrayal of the Emperor's vision, and not only remain silent about it, but actively support it through his continued service and tacit endorsement. Some of the ancient Dreadnoughts have found ways to reconcile this. They tell themselves that the Emperor, could he speak, might acknowledge that circumstances changed, and that rigid adherence to the Imperial truth would have been foolish in the face of the heresy's aftermath. They imagine that he might approve of whatever works to keep humanity unified and fighting, even if it contradicts his earlier principles. They construct elaborate theological arguments about how the Emperor might have evolved into something like a god through the collective belief of trillions of worshippers, how the being sustained by faith might be different from the man who rejected worship. These mental gymnastics allow them to serve without feeling that they betray the Emperor's memory. Every moment they remain silent about his real beliefs. But other ancient Dreadnoughts find no such reconciliation. They know what the Emperor wanted, and they can see how completely the Imperium has failed to achieve it. Yet they also understand that revealing this failure would accomplish nothing except destroying the faith that keeps the Imperium functioning. So they endure, carrying the knowledge of betrayal and failure like a wound that never heals, waking from their long sleeps to fight battles in service of lies they cannot expose without causing more harm than good. Their silence is not acceptance. It is duty performed in the full knowledge that the cause they serve has become the opposite of what it was meant to be. This is the burden that the ancient Dreadnoughts have carried for 10,000 years, and will carry until the last of them finally falls and can rest. They are the guardians of forbidden knowledge, the keepers of truths too dangerous to speak, the witnesses to a failure so complete that acknowledging it would destroy the civilization they gave everything to build. They know what the Emperor really wanted. They understand why he wanted it. They can see how and why his plan failed, and they have chosen, individually and collectively, to protect the Imperium from this knowledge by taking it to their graves, or to the final destruction of the armored sarcophagi that serve as their graves. It is a lonely duty, perhaps the loneliest that exists in the Imperium. The ancient Dreadnoughts cannot share their burden with their younger brothers who were not there, who do not remember the Emperor as he was, who have been raised in the Imperial cult and would not understand how completely it betrays the Emperor's real vision. They cannot find solace in their shared knowledge because each ancient warrior, is isolated within his own armored shell, waking only rarely, and never knowing if the other ancients with whom they might have spoken have survived to wake again. They cannot even take comfort in the Emperor's approval, should he be capable of expressing it, because they know that their silence about his true beliefs makes them complicit in the systematic betrayal of everything he fought to achieve. All they can do is continue serving the Imperium, even as it becomes something the Emperor would not recognize. Continue fighting in the Emperor's name, even though his name is now invoked in ways he would have despised. Continue maintaining the silence that protects the necessary lie, the comfortable myth, the faith that binds humanity together, even as it accomplishes the opposite of what the Emperor's centuries of work were meant to achieve. This is their sacrifice, far more profound than the physical sacrifice of accepting internment in walking tombs. This is their burden, heavier than any weapon they carry into battle. And this is why, when asked what the Emperor really wanted, the ancient dreadnoughts of the Great Crusade will carefully measure their words and choose silence over truth. Conclusion. The weight of ages. Deep in the fortress monasteries, in halls where the air tastes of sacred oils and ancient machinery hums its eternal song, the oldest dreadnoughts stand in their stasis cradles. Some will never wake again, their systems finally failing after millennia of service. Others sleep dreamlessly, waiting for the chapter's need to grow desperate enough to justify rousing them once more. And a very few remain awake, bearing witness to yet another generation of space marines who know the Imperium only as it has become, not as it was meant to be. These ancient warriors have seen the full span of the Imperium's history, from the golden promise of the Great Crusade to the desperate struggle for survival that defines the 41st millennium. They remember the Emperor as he was, walking among his sons with purposes he would not fully explain. They witnessed the birth of the dream that would become the Imperium, and they have watched it transform into something the Emperor might not recognize, something he might have opposed had he retained the power to do so. They carry knowledge that could shake the Imperium to its foundations, truths that would call into question every prayer offered in the Emperor's name, every sacrifice made for his supposed divine will. Yet they remain silent, or nearly so. They tell stories, yes, but carefully selected stories that inspire without revealing too much. They offer counsel to those who seek their ancient wisdom, but they frame that counsel in ways that support the current Imperium rather than undermining it. They have become, over 10,000 years of service, the perfect keepers of dangerous knowledge, absolutely trustworthy because they understand exactly why the truth must remain hidden, yet burdened by that understanding in ways that those who benefit from their silence can never fully comprehend. This is their final service to the Emperor and to humanity, not the battles they fight, though those continue whenever their chapter has need of their ancient power. Not the tactical wisdom they share, though that wisdom is genuinely valuable and freely given. Their final service is silence itself, the choice to protect the Imperium from knowledge of its own founding failures, and the complete reversal of its creator's actual intentions. It is a service no one asked them to provide, a sacrifice no one acknowledges, a duty that brings no glory and offers no relief. Bjorn the Fell-Handed stands, in his sanctum in the Fang, awaiting the next crisis that will require his awakening. Around the Imperium, in the depths of other fortress monasteries, other ancient warriors wait in similar isolation. Some are loyalists who have spent 10 millennia protecting the Imperium from truths it cannot handle. Others are traitors who mock the Imperium with truths their loyalist counterparts cannot acknowledge. All of them, loyalist and traitor alike, carry the memory of the Great Crusade forward into a future that bears little resemblance to the past they remember. All of them know what the Emperor really wanted, and all of them, in their different ways, have chosen what to do with that knowledge. The loyalists have chosen silence, believing that the Imperium's survival requires the comfortable lie of the imperial cult more than it needs the uncomfortable truth of the Emperor's actual beliefs. They watch chaplains preach about the God Emperor's divine will and say nothing. They hear young Space Marines swear oaths to serve the Emperor's holy purpose and do not correct them. They participate in religious ceremonies that would have horrified the man they remember, and they do so willingly because they understand that these ceremonies serve a function that the Imperial truth never could. This is not weakness. This is not cowardice. This is the hardest kind of courage. The courage to bear witness to betrayal and call it necessary. To watch everything you believed in transform into its opposite and defend that transformation as the best available option. The ancient dreadnoughts of the Great Crusade have that courage. They have earned it through 10,000 years of watching the consequences of the Emperor's failure and their own silence about that failure. They will carry this burden until the last of them falls, and when they are gone, the knowledge they protected will die with them. Perhaps that is for the best. Perhaps the Imperium truly cannot survive knowing what its oldest warriors know. Perhaps the faith that binds humanity together is more valuable than the historical accuracy that would tear those bonds apart. Or perhaps the ancient dreadnought's silence represents the final tragedy of the Emperor's grand plan, the last consequence of his decision to keep secrets from those who deserve to know them. Perhaps if the truth had been shared from the beginning, if the Emperor had trusted his sons with full knowledge of what he was attempting and why, the heresy might have been prevented, and the current situation might have been avoided entirely. But that possibility exists only in the realm of might have been, and the ancient dreadnoughts deal in the reality of what is. They know what the Emperor really wanted. They understand why he failed to achieve it. They recognize that the current Imperium represents the complete reversal of his actual goals. And they have chosen, individually and collectively, to keep this knowledge locked away in their ancient memories, to carry it as a burden rather than share it as a warning, to protect the Imperium from truth by maintaining the comfortable lie that it desperately needs to survive. So when you see an ancient dreadnought, when you hear it speak of the Great Crusade in its crackling mechanical voice, when you witness the reverence with which Space Marines treat these living relics of a bygone age, remember what you are really seeing. You are looking at a walking tomb that contains not just the shattered remains of a warrior who refused to die, but also secrets that could destroy the Imperium if spoken aloud. You are hearing stories carefully edited to inspire without revealing, wisdom shared with the understanding that complete honesty would do more harm than good. You are witnessing the last of those who knew the Emperor as he truly was, and who have chosen to protect his memory by concealing his actual intentions from those who worship him as a god he insisted he was not. This is the silence of the ancients, and it is the heaviest burden any warrior could bear. Heavier than the armored shell that encases them, heavier than the weight of 10,000 years of memory, heavier than all the enemies they have destroyed across millennia of endless war. They know what the Emperor really wanted, and they will never tell you, because they understand that some truths are too dangerous for humanity to know. Their silence is their final gift to the Imperium, and it will remain unbroken until the last of them falls and can finally rest. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of the Great Crusade and the burden carried by its oldest witnesses, make sure to like and subscribe to Stories of Hammer for more Warhammer 40,000 lore content. The grim darkness of the far future holds countless untold stories, and we're here to illuminate them, one tale at a time. Until next time, may the Emperor protect.